Hey everybody, this is vandweller, and I'm here with episode 3 of the real life micro sit and go grinder. And this one's called outpatient care, and I think I'm actually stretching this nursing school metaphor just about as far as it can go. And I kind of got sick of that color, that turquoise color I've been using, and in honor of the upcoming Easter holiday, I decided to go with a beautiful pastel purple. John is there. I heard you
Yep,
playing
I'm right here.
as well. Um, so, uh, so how's everything going?
Good. School's going good.
Yeah,
Starting to wind down. Have a new apartment, so
you have a
just
new apartment?
yep,
Really? Are you
yep.
alone in that apartment?
I'm not. I have a roommate this time.
Oh man, that kind of ruins the whole thing we had going. But so you have a roommate. How did you choose a
Yep.
roommate?
He's a friend from our cycling team.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
You guys just sit around all day talking cycling and now is there like on cycling clothes? I always wondered about like cycling clothes because what like I've done cycling but not the same kind that you do. I did like loaded touring,
Uh-huh.
You put on like 80 pounds of gear on a bike and then ride a few hundred miles and camp and all that crap. Now, like, but do you wear that like really tight form-fitting clothing that you wear when
The
you're like,
lycra. Yeah.
yeah. Is
Yep.
there any real reason that there have to be logos all over it for like private people? Because I'll just see like people, they're not sponsored riders. They're
Right.
just like Joe Schlub, and they're
Unless it's a pro team, maybe.
yeah, but I know they're not. I
They
just
might just be buying pro team jerseys.
I guess, but like I just don't know that's necessary. I mean, they do
Uh,
make Lycra without ads on it, right?
yeah.
All
Yeah.
right. Do you wear ads on yours or
No, our school jersey has a
no?
couple corporate sponsors, but not
What's
all over.
so you ride for your school?
Yeah, we just started a team actually just this past year.
Wait, what's is that? What school is that actually?
Indiana University of Pennsylvania,
That sounds really confusing. Like,
IUP. Yeah,
yeah, no, that's what. Do you guys have like football team and stuff?
we do. Yep.
I don't know if I've really ever heard of that.
Yeah.
Wow. So I guess, that's all interesting. Probably not to anyone else, but what the hell? I got to fill up an hour and 20 minutes or probably more. Not that I have real trouble with doing that, but so anyway, poker wise, have you had any time to put some hands in? I mean, it's been I think we recorded episode 2 on March 12th and it is now what, April 6th, something like that.
hmm
So
Yep.
have you had time
I
to
tried
play?
I tried to play almost every day. I've been experimenting with the number of tables that I can handle at one time.
Oh yeah.
Um, I hit a window. I hit the absolute today, and I'll probably scale back a little bit, but just break it into 2 or 3 sessions a day instead of all at one shot.
How many have you been playing? Because before you were playing like one and struggling with two.
Yeah, I found I really liked 4 and 8, and then I went higher, and I think I wound up playing around 10 to 12 today,
Holy crap.
and it was just massive. I think I made it to the middle in almost every tournament, and
Yeah.
then things just went nuts from there.
Yeah, and I mean, that's what happens when you're multi-tabling. It's like at first, you're in the early levels and, there are 9, 8 players or whatever to act every hand. So,
Yeah,
the decisions don't come around that often. You think, oh, I can handle this. And then all of a sudden, you're like high blinded and there's 4 or 5 people at the table and decisions are coming like every 30 seconds on each table.
yeah,
And then
and
you lose it.
I didn't know what was happening. Like I'd call an all in, and then another window would pop up. A little later, I'd go back, see I was up to 4K in chips, so I must have won the shove somehow, and it was unbelievable.
So I don't know. I mean, at this point, I don't know. We'll see. I mean, because I've got, your hand histories. We're going to take a look at some of those. I don't know if I would really recommend you play that many,
Yeah,
but maybe scale it back to like 6 to 8 or something like that. But
I
we'll
think
see. I mean,
that's the sweet spot, I think.
yeah. I mean, maybe you can handle it. So now there was sort of other eventful news that happened, and I hope, by the way, I hope people don't mind this pastel color because, like, I don't know, it's like it's kind of bright. I don't want it to like burn through people's eyes or whatever. Um, but there was some other eventful news that happened, and
Yep.
the news was what, that you lost your full tilt account.
Lost my full tilt account. I'm not sure the exact date. I
Yeah.
got a phone call from a friend, and we were just talking poker, and then he reminded me that he had his full tilt account banned like late in the year last year, and a couple of his friends as well,
Yeah.
for colluding, and they did some tracking, I guess, and just wiped all of them out.
Wait, they were
And
so they must have been colluding, obviously, real high stakes sit and goes, right, to make it worth the time and effort and losing your full tilt account, right?
not at all. No, they were playing I think around $5 or $10 sit and goes.
No way.
Yep. And it wasn't even cash. It was just sit in a sit and go and try to take it. But um
Who?
and we were talking
Why do you have friends like that? By the way, you seem like a smart guy.
I don't know. Ironically, they're the ones that got me into poker, so I don't know if it's not a good thing in that I have friends like that, but
Yeah.
it got me started in poker with just talking to them. I never played with them. The thing that got my account banned was I decided to see if I could log into his account,
Wait,
and
did he ask you to do that, or you just try to see?
we were just talking about it, and I was like, oh, I wonder if it would work from
Oh,
my computer,
dude.
like, which was dumb.
Yeah, that was really, really, really dumb.
Because it's already banned, why try to get into it
Yeah,
anyway?
like what is the point? Like what's the
Yeah,
upshot of that?
there's nothing.
Yeah,
And
no. No, you got to be
instantly,
really careful, especially for anybody else that's kind of listening and you know, and is somewhat new to poker. Don't ever do anything that reeks even a little bit of impropriety because they can and will take your account away from you. You know, so you know, even if you've got a buddy, oh yeah, let's see if we can just sit on the same table. Don't do it. It's retarded. And I'm not saying you're retarded, and I probably shouldn't even be saying the word retarded because that's not nice. I mean, just in case any retarded people are watching, I apologize. But um, so what? So all right, so you did that. You logged in as your buddy, and then what happened?
um, the login screen was thinking for a little bit, and then it popped up a message. I forget what it said, but it said to contact support. And I looked into it, and they sent me a big message on colluding and zero tolerance. And I think even before I had gotten that email, I tried my other account, which was like a play chip account,
Right.
and that got banned. Any account now that I open from this IP address, I guess, just gets banned instantly. So
Wow.
no more full.
Well, that's really a shame because like part of
It
this
is.
series, like kind of one of the things I wanted to do was like go over like this like I have Full Tilt Shortcuts, which is this like multi-tabling assistance software, and I when I play on Full Tilt now I use my like game controller and it works with the Full Tilt Shortcuts, and I was gonna do a whole section on that, and now it's just gone, dude. So like
Sorry.
so where are you playing now?
I switched over to Absolute Poker and Ultimate Bet,
Right.
and I'm trying to get my Poker Stars account going. I have an account there, and they gave me like $5 a while ago, and I ground that down to zero. So it's
Right.
sitting. I have an account now. I just need to fund it, but
Wow. Well,
pretty
yeah,
much Absolute right now.
I would recommend Stars ultimately over those other two
Okay.
because Stars is going to have a lot more volume,
Yeah.
although the players are going to be worse on those other two sites. But if you're going to
Yep.
eventually try to put in now, if of course you're 4 to 6 or 8 tabling, Ultimate Bet, I mean, Absolute or whatever you're playing on is going to be fine. But just as far as game selection goes, like just the sheer quantity of games going on Poker Stars. Um, although, are you getting rake back? I hope on Absolute.
On Ultimate Bet, I am. Absolute, I signed up without. I guess you can't go back. I tried to retag some of these things,
Yeah,
and I don't know if it's through rakeback.com or Rake Tracker, but somehow even my Ultimate Bet, I looked at my account and I'm not getting rake back there, so I don't know what's going on.
yeah.
I
Then,
signed up for it, but I don't know what I have to do to activate it or why I'm not getting it. But
well, I'll help you probably deal with that
okay.
after the video. I mean, I don't know. I could open up like an email and advocate on your behalf right now in the video, but I don't know. A little too cinema verite for what we're doing. But so anyway, you really, yeah, if you're not getting rake back on either site, then you got to go to PokerStars because at least, you can get your account to a point where the point value, because they have that full, that VIP program.
Yeah.
They have that, and you'll get points which aren't really, you'd rather just get straight cash, but the points you can sort of turn into cash through various processes. So I probably would recommend going to stars. And then those of you who are out there who are actually, playing these micro sit and goes, rakeback is really, really important, especially if you're just getting started, because it can amount, if you play a good amount of volume, it can amount to a good chunk of your bankroll. If say you've got $500 to start with, and you're playing, and somehow you're able to get in like 400 something games a week, which obviously you can't because you're busy, but somebody who's doesn't really have any other ambitions or interests can get in a lot of games per week, and you can add 10 to 20% of your bankroll and rake back, every week or two, which is a huge thing. So I wouldn't really want to put in any significant volume without rake back as a sit and go player, especially nowadays. I mean, maybe in the past you could sort of get away with it because the games were so beatable and, win rates were so high. But now, you're where the games are harder, you're dealing with a much smaller edge, and the guys who are going to win money, and an amount of money that makes a difference to their lives is going to be the guys who are putting in a lot of volume, and rakeback is going to be a big part of their winning. So anyway, so that really sucks about your full tilt account.
Yeah.
Yeah, dude, just don't do anything ever
Yeah.
without asking me. Don't sign up for another site. And I don't know about those other rakeback providers you mentioned, but just all of you should get rakeback through Deuces Cracked, because you'll get free Deuces Cracked subscription every month every time you rake like $500. So that makes a lot of sense. So okay, so now forgetting all that, let's see. Last episode we kind of looked at your game, looked at some stuff you were doing, and I told you very emphatically not to do certain things.
Yep.
And I don't remember what those were. What did I tell you not to do?
No limping.
Right, ever?
I think that was the.
I don't know that I said ever. But okay, all right, go ahead.
I remember it like that, but I think I ran into some spots now where I'm thinking. I think it was just like a preliminary rule or something that's going to change.
What about pocket pairs? Like, are you allowed to limp those?
Yes, you're allowed to limp. I got you.
Right.
You're allowed to limp pocket pairs as long as it's multi-way pots and the blinds are, the limp is 20 to 40 times your stack size.
Yeah, depending on, how, your position and players and
Right.
stuff like that, right? So
like you don't lead out with limping a pocket pair, but if it's multi-way,
yeah,
it's fine.
yeah. All right. That's all right. So that's pretty good. And then anything else that I tell you to do, or is that it?
No, take one stab at pots, but don't fire 2 or 3 barrels to try to take down pots.
Right. And now, have you been doing this stuff so far?
Yes. Yep.
All right. And is there anything else? I'm trying to remember if I told you anything else.
Positional play. Early position was like the big 5, queens, aces, ace, king. Re-raise with those types of hands.
Yeah.
Had them written down here.
Yeah, but just in general, just be sort of aware of your position and what hands are opening and
Right.
so forth. And and obviously you're going to loosen up, you're going to tighten up early and then loosen up as you get closer to the button. So you've been doing all that.
Yep.
And and obviously, you've been multi-tabling. So, where you weren't able to do that before. Now, do you think that those things you were doing before, like those things that were sort of overcomplicating your game, really were preventing you from multi-tabling?
Definitely. Yeah, I had so many things going through my mind that what I wanted to do with certain hands that I couldn't just fold them and make it easier for me. It was just I had to make it complicated for some reason. But
Right. But now that you've eliminated those things, you find you could, like, playing more than 2 or 3 or 4 tables is
Yes.
a lot easier now.
Mhm.
Well, that's good. And I see I brought up your shark scope. Let's see. So I've got your new. So this is your old shark scope here, and it was 219 games, which of course none of these are really big samples, right? I mean, you can run really crappy over any sample size, but certainly it's indicative that things might be going well if you were losing before March 12th and before, and then you started winning March 13th and after. So again, they're small sample sizes, but it's sort of indicative that something better is going on, and certainly we have a causal explanation as to why that might be. So there's probably a good chance that you're not screwing up too bad.
Mhm.
Were there some things that you spots that you were uncomfortable, or things you don't quite understand, or think places, or just areas of the game that you felt uncomfortable and didn't know what you were doing, or confused, or
I think suited connectors like beyond 7 and 8, but my king queen, uh, if it wasn't suited, or I don't know, I was just mo mostly folding those types of hands
yeah,
after what you had told me, and
right,
it's straight up poker, but I think there's times where I could play back at some people too.
right. Well, be careful of that because
Yeah,
we don't want to go back to the way you were before.
right.
Now, what about like your late game play? Because really what we looked at last, because there was so many issues with your early game play, we didn't really get to look at a lot of your late game stuff, and high
Mhm.
blind stuff. Do you feel confident in that, or did you still feel a little queasy?
No, that's where I feel a little queasy about like talking about like king queen type hands late game. Let's say I make the money.
Yeah.
I I didn't know how to play correctly to move from third place to first. I would think a lot of my stats
Hmm.
I was out of first, and that's where I get paid. So
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we'll certainly what we can do is take a look at a lot of the hands you played. Of course, you gave me a huge mass of hand histories, and the question becomes, well, how do we go and find out how we're performing in those kind of spots, right? I mean,
mhm,
it's like you just play, say you just played a couple hundred games over the course of a couple weeks, and you want to ask questions like saying like, okay, well, how did I do, right, during that for like in late game situations, three-handed and so forth. Um, and when single players, I have to say, the traditional sort of method that people use when they're going over their games and they're trying to figure out like how they do wrong, or how they did poorly or how they did well or so forth. Most people will open up like Sit and Go Wizard, which you have, right?
yes.
And a lot of times what they'll do is they'll just go through. And have you used this program pretty extensively, or you just kind of mess
N
around with it, or
no, I just messed around with it. These types of tools I've never really used, so
yeah?
it's kind
Well,
of new to me.
yeah. Well, I mean, the first thing that occurs to a lot of people is to go through, to open up, because you can open up an entire game and look at, there's a line for each game. Like this is, these are a list of your games, and then when you click on one of them, it brings you a list of every single hand from number one to the very last one.
Mhm,
And what occurs to a lot of players to do is to just go down the line and let's see, okay, there's a lot of check marks, and they go, okay, I can ignore the yellow ones because those are just warnings, and that's not so bad. And then they only look for the red X's, right?
mhm,
And the red X's are what they, try to eliminate from their game. So they'll look at a hand like this, 4-2 offsuit, and they'll see, okay, it's the bubble, and this one says I should push, and then they go, okay, I can push next hand, but they're not really learning anything by doing that. Like you're just kind of going through, okay, this one says I should have pushed. All right, let me look at the next one, and so I think a lot of players will do that kind of process and think that they're actually learning something. I mean, but all they're really doing is sort of, I don't know, running individual situations by their eyes, and they're not really analyzing what they're actually doing, right?
mhm,
And the other thing about this method that is limited is that Sit and Go Wizard really, it's not a full sit and go analysis tool. What it's really designed to do is to analyze push and fold decisions. And it doesn't really, there's no way to filter out hands in Sit and Go Wizard to say, all right, I want to look at my early position hands and see how I performed, right? I want to look at, uh, medium blinds when I'm over 15 blinds and under, say, 22, and it's folded to me. How did I perform? How did I perform in those sort of medium blind phases? So you can't really do things like that in Sit and Go Wizard. It's great when the blinds are high and you've got 12 blinds or under, and you can see, should I have pushed, should I have shoved, and you can sort of mess around with ranges and push fold decisions. But it's not really good for those other things. Now, uh, that's why I wanted to make sure that we got you a copy of Hold'em Manager, which I just
Mhm.
pulled up here. Let me put that in the frame there. So Deuce has cracked the team over there. Well, over here, I guess. I don't know. Are they here or there? I don't know. I still don't know whether to say we or they, but I guess we were able to get you a copy of Hold'em Manager for free. So I want to thank Krantz and Entity, and those are the two guys I really talked to for getting you a copy of that,
Okay,
which is like an
thank you
eight.
very much.
Well, you should send them a card. I mean, it's
I
not.
love it right now. I love Manager.
Yeah, and so it's a great tool, especially for like tracking your results, right? So you can
Hmm.
see, how you did. So you can set up, let me try to get this into the frame here. I think I made the frame a little too small, but that's okay. Shoot. So like you can see, like for example, your finish distribution across your sample here. Like how often did I finish first, second, third, fourth, or fifth? And so a lot of players will get hold of Manager and use it. Oh, and you can see your graph. There's your graph for at least for your full tilt account, which we can't really. It's pretty relevant anymore. Um, so a lot of players will get hold of Manager and they'll use it just for results tracking. But what I kind of want to indicate to you is that you can use this as a tool to help analyze your game. And the way that you can do that, which is, hold a Manager stores all your hands in it, right? I mean, it
Uh-huh.
has every individual hand. So what we can do is we can actually go to, our hand database, click all here, and it will list every single hand we played. Now, of course, we don't want to look at necessarily every single hand we played. And of course, it's going to take a minute for this to pop up with that circle. But Hold'em Manager has something called filters, right? So we can actually set up, if you go to this thing, it says filter right here. Have you used this stuff yet?
Yes, yep.
You have. Well, you're supposed to say no. This is supposed to be. This is
I
supposed to
even
be. What?
I used the articles at the top of Hold a Manager there, and they suggested running some of the
Yeah.
preloaded ones.
Hmm.
It was pretty cool.
Yeah. Now the ones, as far as I know, in those articles, I think those are primarily like cash game stuff.
Yeah.
But
Yep.
so sit and goes are going to sort of require different things for us to look at than what they might recommend. So that's the way I'm actually going to go ahead and sort of check up on you. This is sort of the outpatient care. I want to see how you're doing. Um, so what we can do is actually set up a filter to see, like, for example, are you sticking to the early position guidelines, right? So what we can
Hmm.
do, for example, here we can, let's choose more than, 6 players. We want when there's 7 through 9 players, so that way it's pretty long-handed and there actually is an early position. We'll just say more than 7. Well, 6, more than 6 is good. So that'll be 7, 8, and 9. So we go choose only early position, and we can see how we're acting when it's unopened to us. And so there's that. And then what we can do is see what hands we've played by going over here to more filters and double clicking on VPIP, right? So
Hmm.
we can see every single hand you played in early position. Now, of course, there are some hands that you should be playing in early position, and we don't necessarily want to see those because we want to really tune in to the ones that you should not be playing, just so I can sort of check up on you. So what I want to do is now when they're yellow, they're all pre-selected, these hands, right, in this whole cards section.
Hmm.
So that means these are all selected, so it'll show any cards, any hands that are, no, actually, no, these are the ones that are selected. And when it's yellow and orange like this, those are the hands it'll show. So we want it to not show the ones that you're very obviously supposed to play, like ace, king, queens, jacks, and tens, and ace, king suited. And maybe you're allowed to play ace, queen suited, but I haven't decided yet. And of course, we're allowed to limp pocket pairs, so I guess I'll just take the pocket pairs out of there. But then again, I do kind of want to see if you're raising them or limping with them. So what we do is we've deselected and turned these blue, right? So any
Uh-huh.
hands that fall outside this range in early position, it's going to show. Hands that you played. So VPIP equals true. Whole cards are any of the yellow ones, and the main filters say early position and unopened. So we can go ahead and save and close, and hopefully, if I did everything right, it will show hands that you played in early position. So what you can then do is if you right-click on the top one here, you'll get a list of options, right? And what we want to do is just replay all the hands. Now, I'm not going to look at all 40 hands, that you played that weren't in that list, but it's, hold on, just gonna, oh great, not responding. Oh, there it is. Hold on. Let's see. I don't know why it didn't do that. Replay all hands. That's what I want to do. Please do that. Don't embarrass me in front of everyone. Okay, here we go. So, for example, here we have ace queen, and let's see, we're at a 3, 6, 8-handed table, and you decide to go ahead and raise. And again, that was a little looser than my recommendations, but ultimately you're going to be able to do that. So I'm not really worried about ace queen hands doing that. But ace jack. All right, let's take a look at our ace jack here. And we can see you put in a 3x raise, and that is a little bit too early for even I don't raise ace jack from that position. Not that I'm the world's greatest single player, but I'm okay, I think. And even I don't raise ace jack in early position. Maybe there are some players that do, but let's see how many players that we actually have the table: 3, 6, 7. So this would be sort of late, early, or early middle position. So ace jack is certainly a hand you don't want to be opening from that position. And then we can choose the next hand. See, this is the list of hands in order, right?
Okay.
Here. Yeah, sorry, I didn't make that clear. So like, and that's probably not in the frame. There we go. So yeah, this is the list of hands in order that we just brought up right here, right? That corresponds to those hands. And we can use these arrows to sort of check and see, or just go to the next hand. So ace jack, there's another ace jack you sort of played in early position, and I just wouldn't really open that. I would stick to ace queen offsuit maybe, but certainly ace queen suited, ace king, aces through tens, and then limp pocket pairs. And even if you wanted limp tens, that wouldn't be that bad. So
Okay.
I would certainly tighten up there. Now I would say this though: if you become very proficient at post flop play, maybe you can get away with raising ace jack and slightly junkier hands in middle position and even slightly junkier hands in late position, but I wouldn't really stray too much from the recommendations I gave you, which I guess, yeah, we're what? Aces through tens, ace king, ace queen suited in early position. Then middle position, I would open up to ace jack suited, ace queen offsuit, pocket nines and eights maybe. And then when you get to late position, you can raise, pocket sixes, pocket fives, pretty much any Broadway ace, maybe ace nine suited, king queen suited. So I wouldn't really stray much beyond that. Maybe on the button you can get away with some trashier hands like queen jack suited and things like that, but I wouldn't really stray too far. So here is an ace 10 suited at a 9-handed table, and yeah, this, to me this is just entirely too early to start getting involved in hands like that.
Okay.
So really, don't think you can get away with me with
I'm nervous now.
yeah, I mean, if you send me hand histories, I can know exactly what you do, but it's really because of the power of these filters, right?
Right.
I don't have to like search individually through every hand history to try to pick them out. This will just pick them out instantly. So the nines here, I mean, that's sort of a desperation shove, and that's fine because they're way too short stacked. And then, ace queen. Let me just scroll through and see if I can find anything. 3-8 suited. I'm guessing that's a desperation. Yeah, there's nothing wrong with that.
I was worried about that when I saw it in the filter.
Yeah, I know,
behind.
3-8 suited. Like, oh, he's back.
Man, that better not be.
Yeah, the old
My
John
hand.
is back, right? 3-8 suited, speculating, outplaying people, and so forth. Yeah, no, that's perfectly fine. That's one of those desperation, things where you may as well just shove.
Yeah.
Because it might be our last chance to make anyone fold. Pocket nines, that's perfectly fine because you're, well, let's see.
Is that a shove?
Yeah, you did go ahead and
Oh.
shove that, and I think that's, I think that's okay to shove actually from that position. I actually have a video that I'm not sure when I want it to come out. If I want it to come out before the series ends, it's a separate video, or if after this video ends, or after this series ends. Although now that I mentioned it, everybody's going to say, "Yeah, come out with it before." So I'm probably pretty much trapped. But and it's about how to specifically to make these shoves when you're far from the button, when you're early position or middle position, and the blinds are high. And a lot of players struggle with what hands they can actually open. And I have a video that's going to come out on that. We can indicate some of the things a little bit later in this video maybe, but I want to save a lot of that for the video because I don't want to give it all out now because then I won't be able to get paid for the other video that I'm going to make. So so we'll get into that. But anyway, I just want to indicate to you that this is I'm not necessarily analyzing all these hands, but the point is to show you what's possible with this. So you can see am I sticking to my own guidelines, right?
Yeah.
And here, oh my God, what are you doing?
Oh, wow.
When was this one? Wait a minute. Yeah, no, this is from 320. So I guess maybe I can't just ignore it. It happened. But so what? All right, here it is. So it folds around to you, and you are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 spots away from the big blinds, and it folds to you, and you go ahead and shove the ace nine suited for 17 and a half blinds. Now, do you remember this kind of thing, or is it so many hands you played you don't remember?
It's been a while since I don't remember this.
This maybe could have
It's
been
a,
like a
it's a
multi-tabling thing.
turbo.
This could have been a multi-tabling thing, you know.
I
But
think I had some of that today. I was just so far gone with some hands that probably made this play something similar like that.
yeah. Now, I would generally stick until you get down. I guess what I will say about this hand is this, just somewhat of an oversimplification, but until you get down to about the 12 to 10 big blind level, probably about the 10 big blind level, I would stick in general with my opening suggestions.
Yeah.
Maybe, you can get away a little bit looser later, but certainly from middle position, early position, I wouldn't deviate too far until you get down to that 10 big blind level with hands like that. So, this is going to be somewhat of an overshove, and certainly there are better ways to play this hand if you're going to play it. But ace-9 suited really is going to be a late position hand, so, don't panic.
Yeah.
Oh my God, ace-9 suited, it's 17 blinds. I mean, everybody else here is like, you're like in second place. So
Yeah.
there's no urgency here. So, I mean, again, I'm not trying to go into any deep analysis of this, but I'm just trying to show you sort of what's possible. And here you make See, of course, everyone I look at brings up something I have to like explain, and it's kind of outside the scope of this particular video. But certainly, uh, maybe I do have to start explaining. I suppose I should have pre-screened these hands so that I could avoid having to explain too much, because I really wanted to focus on late game shoves.
Yep.
Because I think that's, well, there's some dude out there honking his horn. Do you hear that?
No, I don't hear anything.
All right. Well, it's irritating me. Um, yeah, I wouldn't really shove a hand like that, like King Jack offsuit in early position. You may be thinking like, well, I'm so far behind. Well, what is this actually? This is actually a tournament, a rebuy. You know what? I'm exempting myself from even having to look at that because it's a rebuy. Let me do this.
Oh, I don't know what that is.
Yeah, of some reason you have some regular tournaments in here. So I wonder if there's a way to filter those out, actually. Let's see if we can find a way to filter that. That's a really good question, if there's a way to do that. Let me check here. Now, I know we can filter in results. I don't know if we can actually filter out 4 games. I'll have to check on that, or maybe somebody in the forum can sort of let us know. But so I'm sort of, we don't really have to look at those hands because we'll let I Wear Goggles do that. He does he does multi. I wouldn't necessarily shove that hand from that position in a multi, but I'm not supposed to be able to comment on that. Let me do this. So anyway, that's one filter you can do, and that's one I would check.
Okay.
Am I sticking to my pre-flop standards in early position? Another filter you could do is, let's see, we'll clear out that filter. And you can save that, by the way. You can,
Right.
you can save with a save here, and then it will list them, and then you can just load all these filters so you don't have to do this every single time. But we could also see, okay, how are we doing? And this is kind of the stuff I really want to look at, is how are we doing when we're in the small blind and possibly the button, when it's unopened, it's folded around to us in the in late position or in the small blind where we've only got 1 or 2 players left to go through. We want to know how we're doing when we're short stacked. So why don't we say that we have less than, let's say, 10 blinds. I mean, well, we could do 12, but let's just make it easy and say 10. And and let's see what other. We want to look at all the cards that you're shoving,
Mm-hmm.
and more filters. Then what we want to see is, did we shove all in pre-flop? And if we scroll down under the pre-flop filters tab, just right at the very end, right before the flop filters, is all in pre-flop equals true, although I don't want to actually filter out hands we didn't shove, because that's going to be what I think. I did a cursory kind of look over the hands you played, and I want to actually see all those hands. So we're not going to do that. But let's see. VPNP. All right, here we go. So we're not going to look at that. So all we're looking at here is it's folded around to you in the small blind in the button, and no one's entered the pot yet. So let's go ahead and save and close. And so it's now hopefully going to bring up all these hands. So it looks like that any hand that we actually played is going to have either we're going to have won it or lost it. So it's either going to be green or red. So we know that the ones that are clear here are going to be hands that we did not play, right?
Mm-hmm.
So let's open this and see if we can sort of replay all hands, I guess. 247 hands. We're not going to look at 247 hands. And you know what? I also kind of want to avoid right now heads up. So I'm actually going to filter away from that, because heads up it's going to be a whole other topic. So we want to see pretty much when it's like four-handed or more. So
Okay.
let's go back and edit this filter. And how do we do that? Number of players. So is more than 3, right? It's because that'll be 4 and above. So here we go. So now if I replay all hands, and I have no idea if any of this is interesting to anybody at home, but the point, and of course, are we on the button here? Yeah, all right. So there it is. So, and as I said in the first video, the point is me helping you out, and if anybody finds it interesting, though, that's just a bonus. So, I mean, here obviously we're just gonna, I'm gonna avoid a hand that looks like that, but I want to see. Well, you know what? Let's actually just look at the small blind here, because that's going to sort of. What I guess I want to. Yeah, let's just look at the small blind. What I want to find out from you is how do you decide? How do you actually decide? And I'm not looking for the correct answer. I'm just thinking of asking what goes through your mind or whatever. How do you actually decide when it's like the high blinds, and it's folded around to you in late position, or like on the button or in the small blind? How do you decide whether or not you're going to shove all in? Like, what do you think about?
I think of any ace, any king, and I'm not really sure where to go from there. Like, it depends on the size of my stack and the guy that's gonna act after me. But
Yeah.
like I don't know anything about Jack 10 hands like that. If they go in, or Jack 8, like where does it stop from?
Yeah. Now, does it
From ace
matter?
king.
Does it matter like what your stack is, what the other guy's stack is, and what the other guys that aren't in the hand stack is? Like, say that there were, like, for example, in this situation, if there were a guy who were super short, would you sometimes maybe avoid a shove, or would you just just look at your cards, or what would you do?
Yeah, usually I think I want a better hand against the bigger stacks, and I depends of where the position of the short stack is, that he probably has to call me with any hand. So
Yeah.
then my hands open up a little bit to the range.
Yeah. So what I want to do is just sort of get a sense of what's happening.
Okay.
So let's see. Here's one where it's folded around to you in the small blind. You have queen 5 suited, and you fold. Let's see the next one. Here it's folded around to you. Oh, well, we don't have to look at that one because it's so obvious. Tiny stack. And there you went and shoved, so that's good. Let's see. 9-2 suited. Here you fold. Let's see, there's a couple of folds. This one's so short that's easy. What was that? All right. Oh, obviously we're going to shove that, so I don't need to look at that. And you said you're shoving any king, so you folded your king. So let's see. And you folded Jack 7. Okay, so that's all I really need to see. Let me go back to that first one, Queen 5 suited. Right. Queen 5 suited. This is a definite shove. All right. And now, when I try to decide whether or not I'm going to shove all in from the small blind on somebody, and that's kind of the case that I want to go over sort of take the most time to go over because it's sort of the obvious case, and once we understand it, then we can adapt what we've come to understand to what do we do when we're on the button and further. So if you can't just look at your hand, right? Because let's say that we knew that this guy, let's say we knew that this is totally a fantasy, but let's say he was so risk averse that he only wanted to play aces and he would fold every other hand. So then what hands would you decide to shove there for? It's if he only called with aces, a hand that only happens 1 out of every 221 times.
Oh, okay.
What hands do you think you could get away with shoving?
Every hand.
Every single hand, right?
Yep.
And now, let's say that he decided that he would call with every single hand that he had, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, what would that do to the hands that you would shove?
You might as well just shove every hand too.
Well, no. I mean, if you knew
Oh.
you wouldn't shove 3-2, and there's a lot of hands you wouldn't shove, particularly where it's like the bubble, and you knew you're getting called.
I got you.
So like, why risk it, right?
Okay.
So you would tend to tighten up, a great deal if you knew he was calling a lot, and you would tend to really loosen up if you knew he was almost never calling you.
Right.
So somewhere in between there is where the truth lies, right? Because obviously people are going to call more than aces, and obviously people aren't going to call every single hand all the time. So I would say that the main thing to keep in mind when you're trying to decide to shove is just one simple and probably oversimple rule, and that is shove anytime you can get away with it. It's really, really important that we take these blinds, right? Especially when we are so short and so far behind everybody, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the money is made in sit and goes. As we went over in the first or the second episode, there are two basic ways that the money's made. One is we avoid confrontation in the early stages and let other people get into confrontations, right? And then when they bust out, our value in the tournament goes up, right? Well, the other way that we earn money in the tournament is by stealing blinds when people want to fold, right? Now, you might be thinking, okay, well, I'm shoving into the guy and he's the big stack because he's going to call me all the time. Well, no, not necessarily. You sort of have to know your opponent. But there are basically 4 things that I think about when I'm trying to decide to shove. And one is, how strong is my hand? How often is my opponent going to fold? What am I risking? And what is the potential reward, right? And how do I know that those are the 4 things, right? Well, I know that those are the 4 things because when you look at math, which I don't want to get super mathy, but let me try to open a new text document here. Sort of, I probably should have made a slideshow, but hold on. Now I can't find my text document because it's all behind everything I just recorded. Let's see. I'm gonna have to move like everything. All this I can close. Let me just hold on one second. Where's my text document that I created? It is. Oh wait, I have it not showing icons.
I didn't see it.
Let's see. Sorry about all this, people. This is so boring. Let's see. View, desktop icons, and there's my new text document. All right, so then we can hide the desktop icons so you can't see all my pornography. No, I don't have any pornography, obviously. I mean, that wouldn't be right. Okay, so the math of this situation, like for anything that we do in poker, there is like a mathematical value associated with it that determines whether or not it's a good thing to do or not. And that is the expected value of the play, which I think is a term that you're familiar with.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, that basically means, over time, if I continue to do this same thing over and over and over, on average, would it be, would I earn money doing it or would I lose money doing it? And so the actual formula for this kind of scenario, it involves a few different factors. I mean, one is, well, when he folds, right, what do we win? What do we win when he folds? We win the money.
160 and 80. Yeah.
Yeah, well, we win the money that's basically in the pot, right? And since this is a
Mhm.
tournament, it's not actually the chips we win. It's basically, the equity that we gain, if you're familiar with that concept, which I think you've gone over and read in books. So when he
Mhm.
folds, we win the equity gain represented by the pre-flop pot. And so he's going to fold a certain percentage of the time, right? So,
Mhm.
some part of the time he's going to fold, and some part of the time he's going to what? He's going to call. So those are really the two things that are going to happen, and those are the main parts of the equation. If I can't find the percent key because it's really dark in here. All right, there it is. There's a light. Call percentage. So some part of the time he's going to fold, and when he folds, we kind of win the equity gain represented by the pre-flop pot. And when he calls, well, we're going to get into a gambling situation, right? When he
Uh-huh.
calls, either we're going to win the all-in, right? And when he wins, we're going to win what? Well, when we win, we're going to win basically the equity represented by winning his stack, right? By doubling up the equity that we represent by doubling our stack. I mean, this isn't really, a strict mathematical formula. I'm just trying to put it into mathematical sort of terms. And when we lose, we're going to lose the the amount of equity that loser I wrote. Freudian slip there. Sorry. Um,
I know.
so so when we lose, we're going to lose the amount of equity represented by losing our stack. Right? Losing our stack. So if we look at that equation, which is more or less what it is, and I'm probably missing a parenthesis somewhere. I always do that. I'm so bad. Like parentheses are what I failed in math. Um, so if we look at that, we can extract sort of those four things that I talk about, right? One is how often he's going to fold and call, right? And those are really just the same number, right? Because he's going to fold, like his fold percentage is basically going to be 1 minus the call percentage, right?
Uh-huh.
So if he folds 20% of the time, he's calling 80% of the time, right? So the
Mhm.
first factor is how often he's going to fold and call. Second factor is what? Can you pick something else out of there?
Um,
What other kind of thing do we have to think about? Just pick anything out of there. Like, for example,
when,
win percentage and lose percentage, right?
mhm.
Win percentage, lose percentage, all right? And then what else is something in there? Basically, here's another one.
Equity gain and equity loss.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
So we want to know how often he folds and calls, and then and of course, how often we're going to win and lose. But when we win, what do we win, right?
Mhm.
So that's our reward. And when we lose, what are we going to lose? And so what's a good word for that in the context of saying reward? Risk, right?
Okay.
What are we risking, right? So when we win, what do we win? That's the reward. And when we lose, what do we lose? That's the risk. So, and those are basically the four factors that I tend to think about when I'm trying to decide whether or not to shove all in. And so how do we think about that? Well, each one of these sort of has a continuum, right? Either he's going to fold a lot or he's going to fold very little.
Mhm.
Either our hand is very strong and we're going to win a lot, or it's very weak and we're going to, lose pretty often if we're called. Either the reward is going to be really high or it's going to be really low, and same thing with risk. Either we're risking a lot or we're risking very little. Now, each point on the continuum of each of these things sort of indicates or disindicates whether or not we should be shoving. Now, I'm not saying that you should run a mathematical equation every time you decide to shove and fold or whatever. I'm saying that given that this equation is what governs the value of that decision, then we can extract from it the things that make it up and then sort of evaluate it. It's not in a necessarily quantitative way, but in a qualitative way. We can very easily say, we might not know he's calling 80% of the time, but we can say he's calling a lot, right? So when a guy calls a lot, right, would you say that that is indicative of a shove or less indicative of a shove?
Less indicative.
Yeah, so calls a lot is going to be less indicative of a shove. Now, what about what do you think about win and lose, right? If we have a strong hand, is that more indicative of a shove or less indicative of a shove?
More indicative.
And so when we have a weak hand, that's going to be less indicative, right?
Right.
So weak hand, the reward. Now, the risk and reward is going to be somewhat of a tricky issue because we have to deal with equity and estimating that in real time and so forth. But just in general terms, and we obviously can figure this out, if the reward is high and low, right? So say the reward is low, are we more justified or less justified in shoving when the reward's low?
Less justified.
Less justified, right? So reward is low. And in terms of risk, right? If our risk is high, are we more justified or less justified?
Less justified.
Yeah. So when we have a lot at risk, it hurts to lose it, right? If you had to risk $1 million, you wouldn't want to do that. Whereas if you had to risk 50 cents, maybe you would. So high. So these, and I'm kind of doing this as we go along. And I should have made a PowerPoint because everybody loves my PowerPoints. I mean, I get emails saying, "Can you tell me how to make a PowerPoint just like you?" So, so I'm doing this in real time is kind of, so this is I don't even know if disindicative is a word, but it is now. And then, indicative of a shove is folds a lot. Win or lose, right? Strong hands.
Strong hand.
Yeah. Reward, high reward. Risk, low risk, right? Low is fine. So in any kind of situation where you are trying to decide whether or not you're shoving and calling, you should sort of try to come up with a really quick assessment where you stand for each of these factors, right? So, for example, in this situation, right, like, you might not necessarily know if he's folding or calling a lot, but you can sort of, you've played enough of these games now where you have sort of an idea of what's going on. And now if you knew that this player, let's just say that we know that he's somewhat of a tight player, right? Let's just say that we know that, then we know that factor is indicative of a shove, right? He's going to fold more. So when we shove, we're going to win those blinds a lot more often than we would against a looser player, right? So that would be indicative of a shove. Now, our hand is not all that strong, and it's not all that weak either. It's sort of in the middle, so that's kind of a non-factor. It's a nice suited high card, but, it's not pocket jacks, and, and it's not ace 10 or whatever, which would be a strong hand for the situation. So that's kind of a middling thing. Now, the reward. Now, how do we gauge reward? Let me go back to where it showed the blinds, which I don't know why it's not showing the blinds right now. Hold on. See if I can get it to, there we go. The reward. Well, look at our stack, right? And look at the size of the blinds, right? Now, if we won those blinds, how big of an increase would that represent to our stack? So that's 240 chips.
It's over 10%. Yeah.
Well,
20%.
20%, right? Which is when I start to think of a reward as being really, really, really worth it. Certainly if you're adding 20% to your stack, and I'm sort of asserting this without proof, but just as a guideline, if you're adding about 20% to your stack, or 18 or whatever, somewhere around there to your stack, then it's worth it. Like that's a high reward, right? And so of course you can sort of figure out that that's going to be when you have about like 7 blinds or something like that, right? So because just the way the math works and the way that the blinds are always sort of the small blind and the big blind are always the same size relative to each other, and yada yada, you can see that around 20% increase to your stack is going to be about 6.5 to 7 big blind stacks. So when you have that stack size, that's almost always going to be a shove indicator, because that means the reward for shoving your stack in is going to be like about a 20% increase, right?
Okay.
So when you get to that stack size, your first thing should be to think of is, all right, that's indicative of a shove. What else is there anything else? Now, what about the risk? Now, the risk is a little bit trickier to sort of get a handle on. Now, so we have to think when we're in a sit and go. We're sitting there with chips, right? It says here that one guy has 2,700 chips. We have 1,270. So we tend to think of what we have, what we have at risk as chips. But we know that sit and goes are not cash games, right? I mean, you know that
Right.
because, the difference between cash games and sit and goes is that people can win a prize even when they bust out, right?
Hmm.
Which would never happen in a cash game, right? So, so that means that the more chips we have at risk, the more of our equity in the tournament we have at risk, right? But the fewer chips we have at risk, obviously, that would we tend to think that uh, we would have a lower risk. But it's all a relative thing. Or chips aren't really are an absolute, and it's not really what we're looking at in a sit and go. It's our equity. So what we need to really be able to do is to learn to translate how these stacks are distributed into what our equity is in the tournament, right?
Okay.
Now, uh, I'm not going to necessarily go into an exhaustive presentation because I've actually already done that on this site, which is in my first video called Flying Blinds on DC. But I want to sort of indicate to you just in general way to how to figure out, do I have a lot at risk or not? And overwhelmingly, in a sit and go, your equity is determined by basically what place you're in at this given moment, right?
Uh-huh.
So right now, for example, you're in fourth place, right? So
Yep.
would you say that you have like a lot? I mean, you probably would say that you have the least equity in the tournament here, right?
Right.
And
Hmm.
you'd be right. And in fact, you have even less than your starting stack. And, even if you doubled up, you wouldn't be anywhere near this guy. So what happens to a lot of players, though, is that they'll look at this hand and say, oh my God, I've got queen five offsuit. I don't want to risk my entire tournament life. My tournament life. It's so important to me.
Yeah.
You got to think about what that means. Like, what is your tournament life? Say you only had like 82 chips, right? And 80 of them were in the small blind. You had 2 chips behind. My tournament life is on the line. You don't have anything, So throw it in there. Your tournament life isn't anything. It's pretty much like you're 90 years old with, like advanced cancer. You don't. What do you have? Go hunt. Who cares? you know, it's the same thing. So when you the extent to which you're in last place, that tends to lower what your actual equity in the tournament is, and the higher, the more chips you have relative to the other players, and how far away in first place you are. Like, are you in runaway first place, or are you just kind of in first place? Now, like for example, um, like this player is really far ahead of everyone. In fact, if this guy doubled up, he wouldn't even be in first place. And this guy is like way ahead, right?
Yeah.
So he has a lot of equity in the tournament, right? I mean, he has like just about half the chips, and he's in really good shape. You, on the other hand, are not in good shape. So since that sort of indicates that you don't have a lot of equity in the tournament, would you say that your risk in this scenario is low or high?
Low.
It is low because even though you're risking your entire tournament life, your tournament life isn't worth all that much.
Right.
So this is the equivalent of like I'm risking $1 versus I'm risking $1 million. Like you just don't have anything, so it doesn't hurt you to lose it. So I've kind of, and this is sort of an empirical kind of point, but I've sort of figured out that if you have maybe like two of these factors that are overwhelmingly in favor of a shove, then you should probably shove, right?
Okay.
So if you don't have a lot, and if the reward is really good, then that's enough. And and even if he's or if he's say he's folding a lot, and the reward is really good, then it doesn't matter how weak your hand is,
Right.
right? It doesn't matter how much equity you have in the tournament at risk because we know he's folding a lot and the reward is good. So in this situation, when you think about that, I mean, this would tend to strike you over the head. This is obvious. I have to shove this, right?
Right.
Yeah. So I mean, those are the kind of things. Just I just want to give you sort of the barest indication of uh, of what you should be thinking about, and you should be thinking about this every single hand, really, from the first to the last. But particularly when you get to these high blinded situations, when you're on the button or in the small blind, these are the things you should be thinking about when you're trying to decide whether or not to shove and call. So if we, for example, take just knowing that much. Now, in my first video on Deuces Cracked, I give sort of a numerical way to really pin down your risk and reward in like numerical terms. But I mean, it's pretty complicated and it takes a lot of learning. And to be honest, I just don't want to go over it again since I already made sort of the exhaustive presentation there.
Yeah.
But I mean, even just knowing this much, even if you don't know the method that I go over, uh, knowing this can help you a lot, right? That's all you really have to know. Now, a lot is made of like ICM and going through your hands and sit and go wizard and, all right, this one has a negative 0.26% edge, but if he were just, calling blah, 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 and you can do that, and that's going to help fine tune what you do, just by going over this very simple method. But just knowing this much is enough. So let me try to find another example of a shove that, well, that one was good. But let's take a look at why it was good, right? Let's take a look at this hand that you played here. So the blinds are, well, you talk me through this hand, actually, given this context of what we discussed.
Okay.
Here,
It's folded to me, so I'm not going through anybody else.
Yeah.
Um,
And remember our 4 factors here. What we're trying to have you do is to evaluate, just in a general way, where you stand on these, for these factors, right?
the reward is high.
Why is the reward high?
The blinds are so high that stealing it would almost put us. It would put us over 3K.
Yeah, it would increase our stack by how much?
900.
Well, 750.
Yeah, so it would be
almost 33%, right?
Yeah.
33% is overwhelmingly a shove indicator, right?
Mm-hmm.
All right. So what about our other factors?
Risk. Not sure how to gauge some of the, like your fold call. I don't know if you can do that.
Yeah. Well, you
Win,
can
lose.
though. Well, all right. Well, I'm going to interrupt you here, even though
Okay.
I like to talk, and I'm sorry, but I mean, I just in terms of estimating fold and call, right? There's 2 things that you want to think about, and one is what is our opponent like inherently, like just what kind of player is he? So let's see, we'll try to go fold, and I'm typing these out because a lot of people saying, oh, I wish you could, make your stuff available, or I wish you'd done a PowerPoint, and I wish you'd had notes available, blah, blah, blah. So I'm going to type this out so at least you can sort of see it in front of you. So things to think about for a guy's fold percentage is 1, his player type, and 2, your opponent's situation, right? There are some players that we know that are loose players and some that are tight players just inherently, and that's sort of the way they are. And of course, now you have Hold'em Manager, right? So you're able to like have that HUD up and see which guys, tend to play a lot of hands and which don't, right? So that, but now, of course, if you didn't have that HUD, there's nothing wrong with that. You can just sort of observe your opponent. If you see him fold a couple of times when other people have shoved, then odds are, the guy is probably a type of guy who's going to respect the fact that the bubble is a pretty delicate situation, right? He's going to sort of fold a lot. He's not calling with wild hands. Now, if you saw a guy call all in for his whole stack and it was a meaningful stack with like Jack 3 suited, you would say, okay, this guy doesn't really like to fold. So, and of course, when a guy doesn't like to fold, that is, disindicative of a shove, right? So that's one player type. The other thing is you can sort of, if you don't know that, if you're not really sure, you can sort of look at a guy's situation, right? And deduce from that what he might be thinking, right? So for example, this guy here, the guy in the big blind, what is his situation? Well, he's tied basically with 2 other players. It's the bubble.
Right.
He's necessarily going to be risk averse. He doesn't want to just call off with anything. I mean, he wants to, he'll play obviously his aces and kings and jacks and ace king suited and, his really strong hands, assuming we don't know anything about his player type, but he's not going to necessarily just call you with anything just to call, right? This is a very delicate situation for him, and he's got to respect it. Now, of course, he might be the kind of guy that doesn't, but that would be something else we have to know. But if we didn't know anything about him, we would say that this opponent's situation is very delicate. He should be tight in this situation, and so we can sort of assume that he's going to fold a lot, right? But that becomes very important when you want to decide whether or not to shove is, well, what is this guy, what is his context, right? And you can even say, all right, what would I do? right? Say I were L poker 83 in the big blind and somebody shoved on me from the small blind. Well, what would I call with?
Yeah.
And I'm guessing you would call with almost, very little, right?
Right.
Yeah. So you can sort of now that type of reasoning only goes so far because again, opponents have their own tendencies, but at least it's sort of a way to get a foot in the door, as as to figure it out. So I would say in this situation, we should expect that he would be folding a lot because he's tied with three other players, any of whom could bust out at any moment and let him cruise into the money, right?
Right.
So
And the blinds are passing him. It's
and the
another.
blinds, exactly. The blinds are passing him. He's going to feel that sort of sigh of relief, like, okay, it's going to be someone else's turn, to get involved and not mine. I can sort
Right.
of take a breather and see if someone else gets involved. That's a good point. And again, just how delicate the situation is. So given what we said there, would you say that this guy is inclined to fold or inclined to call?
Inclined to fold.
Yeah, inclined to fold and inclined to fold a lot.
Right.
So, and then the next thing on our list would be uh, the win-lose percentage of our hand. Now, it's sort of what would you say about our hand? I mean, it's a crappy hand, a great hand?
No, it's not. It's not a crappy hand. It's definitely playable, suited
Yeah.
connectors.
Yeah, it's sort of in the middle, right? I mean,
Yeah.
it's not overwhelmingly like disindicative of a shove or indicative. It's sort of in the middle and maybe even a little bit positive. Like when he calls, we're going to get into a showdown and it's a robust holding.
Yeah.
It's not going to be, unless he has ace jack or a dominating hand or whatever. I mean, it's not like it's going to only win like 20% of the time. I mean, it's fairly robust. So our hand is, maybe a mild shove indicator. Now, the reward, right? What's the reward? The reward we said is high, right? You said
It was really high. Yeah.
yeah, it was going to add like 33% to our stack. And then
Right.
our risk. Now, the risk was the tough thing, right? Now, the risk is, I mean, just in qualitative terms, the risk is if we bust out, we're out. So
Yeah.
so that kind of sucks, right?
Yeah.
But so our risk is high in a lot of ways. But we also know that he's not calling all that often, or at least we've sort of determined that he is. And I mean, he very well might, but he's not calling all that often. So that risk isn't really going to actualize itself all that often, right?
Right.
So the fold equity sort of has a sort of almost a dominating factor in that regard. That even if it's high risk, if he's not folding, if he's not calling a lot, then that risk doesn't actualize itself. So it's not that big a deal. So here,
Okay.
so here he's folding a lot. Our hand is, mildly, it's okay. I mean, it certainly is. I mean, we'd rather have that hand than a lot of other hands. And the reward is really high. So you have like 2 to 2.5 of these factors sort of indicative of a shove, and you should go ahead and shove. And now this is kind of strictly from an ICM perspective, you know, uh, from what our equity is. When you look at some other factors, though, for example, in two hands, we're going to have to take on these very same blinds again, right? And that's going
Right.
to further whittle our stack away. So that's sort of another um, uh, thing that's a factor that doesn't really come into this equation, but it's sort of another thing to think about. Um, it's not really kind of directly captured by the math of the EV math of the situation, just sort of the basic EV math. Now I'm sure there's some way in the future that someone's going to figure out how to quantify that, but right now we really don't have a way to quantify that. But we do know that that factor alone is also sort of indicative of a shove too. So everything, not everything, but I think given when you sum all this stuff up together, shoving is the right play, and you did go ahead and recognize that and do that. Now, here's other situations, right? Here's another situation. Now, let's see. It's folded around to you,
This is the same game.
and I think it is the same game. It's the very
Yeah.
next hand, right? So now let's see. It's folded around to you in the small blind, and let's take a look at. Let me get the so it doesn't say folds. Let's put his stack on the table there. So going through our four factors, sort of in order. What would you say? What would you say about each of them?
I guess we calls
Like,
a lot, maybe.
yeah. Well, what would you do in your situation? Say you're sitting there and you've got a hand, right? A guy shoves
Uh-huh.
on you. right? What kind of hands would you call it? I mean, it is the bubble, you know. I mean,
Right.
if you,
Um.
like, would you call with Jack two?
No.
You'd let the blinds pass through. Would you call with Queen six offsuit?
No, probably not.
Yeah. Queen nine
Uh,
suited, maybe something like that. You know,
yeah.
you would. I mean, just because of the
Yeah.
overwhelming pot odds or whatever, and you're so far behind. You see, here's his. See, this is where we actually look at his situation. Well, what is his situation, right? Does he have a lot of equity in the tournament or very little? You know, he doesn't have very much, so
Yeah,
he's
very little.
more justified in risking it. That being said, guys don't necessarily call off with like the really crappy hands. They're going to restrict themselves to something that sort of plays well, right?
Hmm.
So I would say maybe he's calling like 30% of the time, which maybe a little more, maybe 35, 40, but it's not really a shove indicator, is it? You know, how often he calls and folds. I mean, it's certainly not in our favor,
Right.
but he's probably still folding, a little bit. It's not like he's calling 100%.
Yeah.
So it's sort of in the middle, right? He might call a lot. He might not call very much. It's hard to say. So it's sort of in the middle. Now, our hand, right? Our,
Yeah.
our hand is pretty bad.
Right. So
So
we can.
yeah, that's not really a shove indicator. I mean, if we get called, I mean, obviously you always have showdown. Like here's the thing about your hand. No hand is hopeless, right?
Yeah.
And certainly if we get called, I mean, there's going to be a lot of times where we're like 38 to 40% to win against his range. So we're never totally hopeless, but this hand would seem to be sort of a disindicator. We're not shoving because of our hand, right?
Right.
So what about the reward? Well, what's the reward?
Be still high, still fairly high.
Yeah, we'll be adding 750 to a stack of about uh, 3,000,
Three thousand. Yeah.
which
Almost.
which would be a 25% increase, right?
Right.
So that's pretty overwhelming reward, right? And what
Yep.
about our risk? Let's take a look at our risk, right? So we shove on him when we lose. That's what the risk is, right? What
Right.
do we end up losing? Well, what do you think about that?
You you pr even if you lose the hand, you're in his situation for the next hand. So the blinds are past you.
Yeah,
You have around 1100 left
we
probably.
actually have more than that, I think, because if we lost, we'd lose what 1370. So we'd still have about 1,500 chips. We'd
15. Yeah.
blinds or so.
Yeah.
So, um, we wouldn't like to lose,
Right.
but we wouldn't be out of the tournament.
Right.
Um, and so I mean, we'd still be in it, and we would have some fold equity, and we'd still be within like, shouting distance of these other two guys. If we shoved all in and doubled up, we'd be right back in it. So it's
Right.
not like if we lost, we'd be hopelessly out of the tournament with two chips left, and who cares? I mean,
Uh-huh.
we'd still have sort of a fighting chance and fold equity and so forth. So the risk isn't really as bad as it could be. You know what I mean? Like we're not out of it. We'd only lose 1,300. We'd have fold equity. So the risk isn't really all that high. I mean, it's
Yeah.
high. I mean, we don't want to lose, but it's not that bad if we do.
Right.
So that's somewhat of a shove indicator, since certainly it's more indicative of a shove than it is not. So even though our hand is kind of crappy, it still has a chance on its own. He should be folding somewhat of the time. I mean, and this is one of those situations where even though you don't have any one factor besides reward that's like overwhelmingly indicative of a shove, the other three kind of add up to make up that other one factor that we need. You know what I mean? Like maybe our hand is like half indicative of a shove. Maybe our risk is like half indicative of a shove. Maybe his fold equity is like half indicative of a shove. Well, 3/2 equals 1.5, and the reward is certainly worth it, right? So
Right.
you've got like 2.5 factors really when you add it all up that indicate, yeah, maybe we should be shoving here, right?
Uh-huh.
So I'm sorry if I was just adjusting my microphone. Sorry about that. So I would certainly go ahead and shove this here. And the other thing is, we also, we're going to have to take on the blinds. Again, sort of that same issue that happens. The blinds are really high, and we're going to have to take them on if we, and not that it will put us hopelessly out of the tournament, but it's still another thing to think about. So this kind of hand is certainly going to be a shove, in my opinion, unless we knew this guy was just calling every single hand. But I mean, even if you look at it from his perspective, I mean, there are hands you would fold here, you know?
Yeah.
So I think our fold equity isn't as bad as you might think it is on first blush, right? So
Okay.
now this hand is pretty obvious, so we don't necessarily need to look at that. Let's see how we did here. And that's one that we folded, right? Now, what do you think about this situation? Let me put his screen back on. There we go. I'm trying to make sure all the stacks are showing. What do you think about this situation within the context of those four factors? And that's a 300 line though.
Okay. The
So let's just go
reward is
one.
high.
The reward is
Okay.
high. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, shoving adds like 33% to our stack. So that's really overwhelmingly like yippee, right? Okay.
Right. It's a
What,
strong hand.
yeah. Well, once we do our reward, risk and reward sort of go together. So we'll sort of
Oh, okay.
specify that risk reward context first. What about our risk? What do we have in this tournament? Like, what is our standing in this tournament?
You're fifth. You
Yeah.
need two people to go out before you even.
Yeah. I mean, we're a little bit ahead of this guy, but for all intents and purposes, we're tied for last.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So, and we have like less than our starting stack and so forth. And, so we don't really have a lot of equity in this tournament,
Right.
compared to everybody else. I mean, there's this guy. I mean, the equity is concentrated in these two players, and these other guys are just splitting what's left. So yeah, we don't have a lot of
Right.
risk, right? Because we don't have a lot in the tournament, so therefore it doesn't hurt us to risk it. And so the risk is a shove indicator, right?
Mm-hmm.
Reward is a shove indicator. So there we've already got two. So even if we can get anything from the other two, that's going to make this kind of a hand of shove. And in general, so like, all right, win, lose. Yeah, it's a pretty shitty hand. Sorry, I'm not supposed to swear in these things. It's a pretty crappy hand. But again, no hand is really all super hopeless. But certainly this is a shove disindicator. Fold and call. Well, it might seem at first kind of hopeless, but he doesn't necessarily want to just lose the other 900 or the other 1,000 chips or whatever it would take to call this all in, right?
Yeah.
So he's going to be folding some amount of the time. People get so worried in this small blind kind of situation that, oh my God, he's calling me no matter what. But you have seen these games, and players fold to this kind of thing all the time, So obviously he's going to call us with strong hands and sort of high, medium kind of strength hands, but he's going to be folding like a good number of the hands that he has. So we actually do have some fold equity over him because of how high our stack is,
Uh-huh.
So we've already got the two major factors in favor of a shove here, risk and reward. The fold equity, well, we have some, so that's enough. It doesn't matter what our hand is, right?
Uh-huh.
When you got 2 to 2.5 of these factors, no one, you can't let any one of them say, oh, I can't shove because my hand is bad. Well, that's only one of the four factors in this equation, right? So
Yeah.
so it's not going to make up this dominating part, but people get so hand focused, oh, how can I shove 4-7? Well, how can you shove 4-7 is because you're not risking much, because there's a lot of reward and he's going to fold a lot. That's how. I mean,
Right.
So anyway, I think that's enough to sort of cement, this process in your mind, and hopefully you've written it down or I can email it to you or whatever. But,
Yes, I've been writing it. Yep.
yeah, but now is this somewhat of a revelation to you? Is this like a different way to think about it than you were thinking about it before?
Yeah, definitely. My thinking like on a 4-7 hand like this was I fold it and just wait for any ace or king. That was like my big hand. My go-to hand for a shove was any ace or king.
Yeah,
I would feel much better pushing everything in.
yeah.
But I have a huge opportunity when everything's folded to me in the small blind to pick up a lot of chips.
Now, how does this change when you're on the button? That's the other question, right? Let's say
Okay.
the button. I mean, we change our filter. We edit our filter to be from the button, right? Well, the same thought process occurs, right? But we have to sort of evaluate a couple of our factors a little differently. So let's go to replay all hands here. Now so anyway, but these filters too, I think, are a very helpful thing. I mean, part of this video isn't just the shove and fold and what to think about, but it's also, the fact that you should be going over your games not just by opening sit and go wizard and looking at the red X's, because now while a lot of these situations would come up under the red X's, the other thing that's weird about these red X's and sit and go wizard is that they assume these ranges that gives on default are correct. So sometimes it doesn't have the ranges right, and and you happen to not have shoved when the ranges it gave were such that you shouldn't have shoved given its ranges, but if you'd made the ranges more realistic, you should have shoved. So you can't just go by the red X's because the default ranges that it gives don't necessarily reflect what the underlying reality, and it might not say that the thing that you did was a mistake, even if it was.
Right.
So, in my opinion, there's really no substitute from going back to going back and looking at your play as you actually played it, to determine the factors, and then to come in if you're unsure, to come in and use, or you want further clarification or a more precise kind of answer, to then come in and open up Sit and Go Wizard and make a hand setup. But if Sit and Go Wizard is your like primary tool, then you're missing out a lot. In my opinion, you should really go with like hand replayers and looking at your hand in real time. The other thing that I like to do is, by the way, on this subject of reviewing my hands, I like to record my sessions with like Camtasia or some like video recording software, because then I can go back and just see, and watch. You don't have to record every session, but if you're like, for example, playing a new, like you're going from playing 2 tables to playing 4 or 6. Record those sessions, because sometimes when you're playing, you don't see that you're missing something that you're actually missing.
Right.
So, but when you go back in the harsh light of reality, and like you can look at it without being involved in it, you be more objective about it. You can see, oh my God, I mean, I played like an idiot. And sometimes when I'm running bad, this is what I'll do. I'll just record every session I play for a couple of days and then go back and look at it and just see, am I missing something? Am I doing something wrong? Is there something I'm not considering? And it will become evident when you actually go back and look at your play. So don't necessarily over-rely on these ICM calculators. Just keep them in their place. The most important tool you have to assess your game is your own eyes and your own knowledge of what to do. So anyway, that being said, I want to go ahead and take a look at hands that you played from the button, and that one's going to be obvious because you're so short. And let's take a look at maybe a good model hand here, one that's sort of uncomplicated. Now, did you end up shoving this? All right, I'm going to find one that you didn't. Let's see. All right, so here's one that I probably would have shoved here. So let's, in light of our 4 factors that we're talking about, and when I came out with my first video, I got a lot of private messages and emails, and however else people contact me, I guess, and they said, okay, well, that's great. It was all about shoving from the small blind, but what do I do from the button? Well, it's the same process. I mean, there's nothing different. These 4 factors still govern the value of this decision, and therefore, just in a qualitative way, like a kind of cursory way, you can still evaluate them there. So, for example, I mean, what's going to change? Well, what's going to change really is our folding call percentage. Now we have to get through 2 players instead of 1, right? So we're going to get called a little bit more often. But, win and lose, well, yeah, because sometimes we might get involved in multi-way pots, yada, 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 but that doesn't really happen all that often. So win and lose doesn't really change all that often. Our hand strength is kind of still our hand strength. Reward, does that really change? Not really. I mean, we're still winning. We're still adding a certain amount to our stack and so forth. And risk, that doesn't really change because our equity is our equity. And if we have very little, then, it still doesn't hurt us to miss it just because we're going through 2 players. So, so anyway, in this situation, I would analyze it in this almost the same exact way. How often are they folding and calling? Well, we actually have a stack that can sort of damage both of these guys, right? I mean,
Right.
So certainly we have fold equity over this guy, right? He's not just going to call off for no reason, right? So we're going to be able to make him fold a bunch of hands. Now you might worry about this guy, right? This big stack guy, and because people think, oh, he's a big stack guy, but and so he's going to be calling me a lot. Now, is there some reason to think that he might not be calling you like super wide? Is there any reason here? Just in the inherent setup of the hand?
No.
Well, I will. Okay. Well, I will tell you this: guys in the small blind tend to call less often than you think. Well, less often than they would than if they were in the big blind. The reason is because, well, they're in the small blind. There's one more person left
Somebody else to act.
to
Right.
act after them. So they don't want to necessarily call your all in and then have this guy shove over the top and then recommit chips. Like they can sort of foresee that in their mind, that happening. Even if they over-exaggerate that possibility, it's still a factor, right?
Right.
So players do tend to be a little bit tighter, and you can assign tighter calling ranges to them when they're in the small blind. Also, they have less money in the pot than that's how they perceive it anyway. I mean, that's not really true that they have less money in. I mean, the money's in the middle, right? It's gone. They just have this stack. But they perceive it as, all right, I'm not getting as big pot odds as I would if I were in the big blind. I mean, so that's another factor. But so when you have the big stack in the small blind and you're shoving it to two players, that's actually a good thing for you. You'd rather him be here than here.
Okay.
So we do have some modicum of fold equity over these guys. I mean, certainly it's more of a shove indicator than it is a dis indicator. And of course, that's a readless assessment. If we had a read on any of these players that they were really super loose, then we would change our assessment. But not knowing anything, just the inherent situation, apart from particular players' tendencies, we would say that we actually have a good amount of fold equity because our stack can hurt them. And we have, the big stack player who might be more apt to call us happens to be in the small blind. So it looks like we have fold equity, right?
Okay.
Win or lose. Now, our hand is not great, and people do tend to overvalue pseudo connectors, but it's a pretty robust holding. I mean, we these are the kind of hands that if you do happen to get called and it's against one of the strongest hands, these are the best hands to have. Now, that's not a reason in itself to shove it, but so it's a weak hand, but it plays okay when you're all in. It's not terrible. So it's probably not totally disindicative and it's not indicative. It's sort of neutral. Our reward. Well, our reward is 50, 100, so 150 of an 830 pot. So we're gaining about 17% and so forth. So, it's right on the cusp of being like overwhelmingly okay, right? So it's just about there. I mean, it's certainly an indicator, right? Because that is in our favor, right? We want to gain these chips. It would really help us out a lot.
Right.
And then what about our risk? Well, what's our risk? What's your assessment of our risk? How much equity do we have in this tournament right now?
Very little right now.
Yeah, I mean, we have less than 2/3 of our original stack.
Right.
These other guys are so far ahead of us that our chances of finishing in a high money spot just on its own, really not that good. So when we don't have a lot at risk, we are more inclined or more justified in risking it. So,
Right.
so this is the kind of situation I would shove a lot from the button. And in my opinion, most players that come to me for coaching do not shove widely enough on the button. They'll still, and some of them might do their, the required small blind shoves for like any two cards and so forth. But from the button, they just think, okay, I'm not in the small blind, I can't shove. You still have a lot more fold equity than you think, assuming, players are somewhat reasonable. And if you have any kind of reason, now you do have to shove more tightly, so your hand selection is going to get a little tighter. But with a hand like 6-5 of hearts, suited connector, it's a robust holding. Now, I wouldn't shove 6-2 offsuit necessarily, but I would if these guys were really tight. If I knew that they were very tight, I would shove it like any two cards. If I had fewer blinds, that would mean the reward is better, and that could lead me to shove any two cards in that regard. So
Right.
there are times when you can shove any two cards from the button, and you just have to sort of see how those factors add up to that. These don't quite add up to that, but I think our hand is sort of strong enough to be able to do that, and our fold equity, and our risk. And the reward is decent too. So all those kind of factors, while maybe only one of them is sort of overwhelmingly indicative of a shove, sort of the three of them on their own also total up to, make it enough. So I don't know. That's certainly a hand you wouldn't have shoved before, but does that all make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, it does.
And of course, this is how we're going to get ourselves out of the hole, right? I mean,
Right.
we don't have anything, so how do you expect this to happen? I mean, you've got to sort of make things happen. And of course, the shorter your stack too, and to talk about the sort of non-ICM factors that we talked about, the blinds are going to come around, and when the 150 comes through, that is going to, kind of hurt you a little bit. Now, that won't
Yeah.
be as big of an issue when it's long-handed, but certainly when it's five-handed, you can do that. So assuming we know that they're going to fold, yada yada, that's that hand. Now, so well, here's another example. Right. Ace three. Well, you went and shoved that, and you're thinking as you had the ace, right? I mean, because
Right.
your thing was, if I have the ace, I'll do it, which is a good guideline, but it's going to make you too tight.
What if you just shove in any position with that one?
No, I wouldn't.
Okay.
Once you get past the button, what happens is, the possibility of your getting called increases, all that much. I mean, it increases a lot more the more players that are, that you have to get through. So when I have, but when you're on the button, what becomes more important is the individual player's tendencies in the blinds, right?
Okay.
But the further you get away from those guys, the more that there's sort of a generalized, kind of risk context that sort of happens, like, if you did it when you were under the gun, I mean, even if they're all tight, there's still five players to get through, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
I mean, that sort of is going to put a restraint. I wouldn't really start to shove a hand like this in any position other than the button until I got to like five blinds, you know?
Okay.
Um, certainly under the gun, if I had five blinds or, 4.5 or whatever, then I would shove a hand like this, but that would be a desperation shove. Like certainly this guy here, if he had ace three, I would recommend he goes and shoves it.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, it's just that risk of getting called increases so much the more players are involved. So um, I'm going to have a video on that. Of course, now we're up to 90 minutes, and I don't even feel like I did anything. So that's the thing that sucks. But I mean, that's okay. I mean, there are 8 episodes. So one thing I wanted to touch on, but I don't think we're going to get time to, is when to call all ins.
Okay.
But I wanted to sort of get, and that again, that's a thing that we can sort of filter, right? I mean, I can't overstate the importance of these filters in Hold a Manager. So if you wanted to find out all the times that and I'm not going to go over necessarily the whole presentation of when to call an all in, but you can sort of get a sense of that now that we sort of know what the factors are for shoving all in. You got to imagine that the calling all in factors aren't going to be all that different, right? I mean, we
Right.
still have a hand, we still have a risk reward context, and we still have a range of hands that we're up against that we have to sort of assess what he's shoving and folding, right? So there's it's not going to be all that different of an analysis, but again, I can't really overstate the value of these filters. So if you wanted to do that, you'd say, okay, I'm in the big blind. I mean, that's like the most obvious case. And action facing player. Well, let's see. We can use these filters, I think. I'm still getting a hold of these filters because I'm trying to remember where this one was. Pre-flop.
Called pre.
Called, yeah, it's somewhere. Well, let's actually we'll just go by this. Like it's raised ahead of us in the big blind. There's one raiser, and so we have fewer than 10 blinds, and there are more than 3 players. We'll just see what that generates for us, and see if we like that. Replay all hands. Well, all right. So that looks like it's generating. Well, he's kind of raising a normal standard side raise. So I wonder, is there a way to... Now, some of you guys are going to be better at this program than I am, so but that's okay. But that's good though, because we have a thread, right? So those of you who can come up with decent filters, I want you to go ahead and do that. I think there's a filter by action.
Do you want my action to be move all in or just call?
I want your action to be, if we're shoved on, I want our action to be, what should we be calling all in or not? You know what I mean? I want this to be like an all-in decision. But
Okay.
if you use on this filter, edit, if you go on this filter and say pre-flop all in, that's going to be, whether we are actually going all in ourselves. So, and
Oh, I see.
we don't want to filter that. We don't want to filter out the times we folded because we still want to analyze them, right?
Yeah.
So, okay, pre-flop facing raise size, right? Pot is bigger than. Let's see if we can we do this for blinds? I'm not sure. Pot is bigger than. I don't know. Let's see what happens if we write 10. Does that do anything? I don't know if that's in terms of blinds or not. Some of you guys in the forum are going to have to help me, but this is good. This is an opportunity for, you know, you guys to, chip in and help me out. I mean, listen, I've helped you guys out a lot. I think you guys could help me out a lot. So anyway, the thrust of this video though is use Hold'em Manager, use the filters, right? And because it's going to give you more information than just using Sit and Go Wizard is. And I know that like the theme of a lot of my videos is like, Sit and Go Wizard sucks, but that's not what I mean. What I mean is people over rely on it and take that as the be all and end all of the analysis of their games. And then the other thrust of this is we use this to sort of isolate situations when we could shove all in pre-flop, and we looked at the factors of whether or not we should do that. Whether or not our fold equity, our hand strength, our risk and reward. And it's always it's an important. I'm going to get into this as we get into further episodes, but it's important to constantly be able to monitor your risk reward context, right? Like saying, as in, always be aware. Do I have a lot of equity in the tournament or not? Would it hurt me to risk it? And is there a big reward right now? So you constantly want to be monitoring that, not just necessarily start thinking about that when the situation comes to you, right? You should always try to get yourself into the mindset for any given table you're playing. Is this a table where I should really start to think about shoving and not? And you always want to be remembering that. So anyway, I hope there was some stuff of use in this video. I mean, it's getting to be 96 minutes, and I'm just done. That's long enough. If you guys don't like it, the hell with you all. And on that happy note, I will see you next time. Oh, what are we going to do next time? I think next time we're actually going to do a sweat session to sort of see how you're doing all this stuff in real time.
Okay.
And just, so I can sort of grill you on your thought processes while you're actually playing and hopefully distract you enough so that you lose a few buy-ins. So anyway, until episode 4, I will see you all next time.